Hello, in this video we're going to start talking about the first attribute that we'll be studying. And attributes are fairly easy to understand and to apply. They are basically ways to make you able to customize your inspector very quickly, as we explained in the last lecture. And to get started, I'm going to create a script here. So right click on the assets folder, create script. If you didn't notice, I already have a project here in Unity set up so we can explain those concepts. And I'm going to call this attributes example. So in this section, we're basically going to be taking a look at ways to quickly being able to customize and automatize some stuff in the inspector of Unity. And for this attribute, think about the following example. You have you are a programmer in a team, and you have a series of level designers or game designers, and the role of those guys is basically to make the game playable and to make it balanced. And sometimes, often, a lot of the times, they have to deal with scripts that you wrote, but they have to change the values of some attributes in inspector or some variables in inspector. And sometimes you write a script that only works with values that range between 0 and 10. And then you tell that guy, okay, I have the script for you. This script will do what you want, but you'll have to make sure that this value stays in between 0 and 10. If it goes off range, then you'll have problems. And sometimes that guy didn't write that down, and he may end up forgetting it. And then, of course, the problem goes on and on until he actually goes and talks to you, and then you have to explain it again. But a very easy way to fix that will be explicitly telling the script that that value can only range between 0 and 10. But there's no built-in solution for that in C#. So Unity wrote these attributes that you can apply into your variables and basically change their behavior. So I'm going to start off by creating a variable here. It's going to be a public integer, and I'm going to call it skill value. Let's say that this has some application in a real project. If I go back to Unity and if I apply, obviously, this script to any of my game objects here, let's say this one, you can see that I have this skill value here, and I can change it to whatever value I want. So I can go negative, I can go, of course, above 10, and there's nothing clamping it here. So for this, we're going to be using a special type of attribute. And attributes, very easily explained, they are stuff in between square brackets that you insert in front of your variable or before you actually define your variable. So right here. So they are always going to stay in between square brackets, and an attribute must be coded, of course. So Unity wrote these attributes for us. Later on in this series of videos, we'll be learning how to write our own custom attribute, so you can customize a special class of yours. And this attribute is called range. So pretty self-explanatory. And in between parentheses, we'll be telling this attribute what the value should be. So what's the range going to be? And in this case, let's say 0 and 10. So the attribute will always be applied to the variable that it's defined right after it. So in this case, skill value. And you can stack multiple attributes in case you have a necessity to do that. So you can, stack a different attribute here. Let's say, of course, that it exists. So if it doesn't exist, of course, there's no reason for me to put it here, but I'm just explaining to you that if you happen to have different attributes, you can stack them right before you actually define your variable. You can, of course, insert your attribute in front of the variable like so, but for readability, I prefer to write it just before I actually define my variable. And if I go back to Unity, it's like magic. Now I'll have a slider that won't let me go off this range, which of course is 0 and 10. And your range can be anything. You just have to add those two properties. One is the minimal, which is 0 in this case, and one is the maximal, which is 10 in this case. And you can see that this only works with integers, so I cannot go with floating point here, of course, because that's an integer. But if I change this type to float and I keep the same range, there's an overload attribute that works with floating point values. So that attribute will actually see that this is a floating point value and will let me range with floating point values here. And I can change the precision, I can do whatever I want. And this will let me go below 0 or above 10. So if I try to force it, let's say that this will be 34, it won't let me go. You can see that it stays at 10. And this is basically the first attribute that we'll be studying. It's a very, very simple attribute, and of course let you customize some stuff and make the life of your team easier by forcing the value to be at some constraint that you know that it's going to work.